Welcome viewers, audiences. Today we have expert in blockchain. First of all, greetings to all of you on the occasion of Pandit Ayatithasa's Jayanti, who was strong revivalist of Buddhist India movement in South India. So on this occasion, greetings to you all. We have today with us an expert in the blockchain, Gaurav Somanchi. Welcome, Gaurav.
Thank you. Jai Bhim, sir.
Blockchain, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency are the keywords which we are hearing from past few years. And how it is, how it has been developed, how it works, whether it has disrupted the industries, whether it has improved, what are its applications and opportunities in coming years. That's what we are going to hear today from two experts, Gaurav and Gunwant. As the name suggests, Gaurav has brought Gaurav to his family and to community. If you search Gaurav and blockchain, he is everywhere in the blogs, from the town like Nasik to Washington DC, in Europe, in Africa. Gaurav has initiated project with extensively done work with state of Chhattisgarh, where he conducted first pilot project in blockchain in e-governance, land record management, and health records. He also was fellow for Dalai Lama fellow for in the year 2019, and where he presented his work in the University of Virginia. He was also been selected as a future leader by British Council, and he has spent amount of time in Cambridge University working on as a future leader, and he's presented his work in the UK Parliament, both in the House of Lords and House of Commons. So Gaurav is a graduate from IIM Lucknow and an engineering graduate, computer engineering graduate. He has extensively worked on this technology for last few years, and he is a CEO and co-founder for Immer Technologies, Immer Tech Innovations Private Limited. So we are going to listen from him, the application, the technology, how it works. So welcome Gaurav to Ambedkar Karwa, and without much taking his time, I will pass the mic to Gaurav.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Jai Bhim. In fact, that was very warm introduction. I remember very clearly that when we first came out with our book, Hit It in the Belly, back in 2017, that was the first time we met. And yeah, I came to your office in Pune. It was near Yerwada, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So yes, I still remember the meeting very distinctly. And thank you for giving me this opportunity. So without further ado, I think we should directly begin, and I'll share my slides with you now.
Yes.
So can you enable attendee screen sharing from your end?
It's enabled.
It's sharing. It's showing that it's disabled for now.
Just a moment. Try now.
It's still showing the same thing, that host has disabled attendee screen sharing.
I haven't basically. Sometimes technology.
Yeah.
No, nothing is from my side, Gaurav.
There should be an option for attendee screen sharing.
Okay, now try.
Yeah, now it's okay.
Oh.
Can you see the screen, sir?
Yes. It's very much there.
Okay. So just to give a small overview of how we plan to go ahead. First, it is very necessary to understand the history of accounting. And because that is the whole story of blockchain, blockchain has less to do with the history of computer science and more to do with the history of how we have kept a record of things. The second, of course, which we are going to look for is the origin of Bitcoin. Why was it revolutionary in 2008? And also the distinction between what is blockchain and what is a Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency. As I keep saying that if you imagine as the Bitcoin as Facebook, then blockchain would be something like the internet. So that is the kind of a relationship that exists between the two. Then of course some significant use cases of blockchain, and also what we are currently doing with the farmer collective. Sahyadri Farms is where we are working at right now. Right now I'm speaking from Nashik along with my team. Gunwant will be also explaining the example of the India's largest farmer collective as we go ahead. And I've also conducted blockchain workshops in quite a few places, including NITs, IIMs in US, in Europe, in Cambridge, and many engineering and management colleges. That is the same thing that we are also going to learn here today. So first, before jumping into what is blockchain and what is exact of the concepts, it's important to get familiar with the hype. For those who might not have come across the technology, for those who are completely new, sometimes it helps to start to orient yourself with the hype that exists around it, and then understand the blockchain. So Mr. William Mugayar, he's a very well-respected business professional. He has said that the blockchain cannot be described just as a revolution. It is a tsunami-like phenomena. And John McAfee, you must have heard of the McAfee antivirus. It is the world's first antivirus. And although he has made so many controversial statements, but this is also something that he has said, that you can't stop things like blockchain. It will be everywhere and the world will have to readjust. The world governments will have to readjust. And what are the Indian bureaucracy saying? In fact, I would urge you to take a note of this book called The Bitcoin Saga by Miss Rachna Singh. She's an IRS from the 91 batch, and she has written a really good book which documents the history of Bitcoin, especially. Not particularly what blockchain can do and all of that, but the focus is entirely on Bitcoin. So she has said that politics rather than technology is the single largest factor that will decide the future of Bitcoin or blockchain. Leon Liu of Free Market Foundation has said that every person needs to know about Bitcoin as it is the foundation towards understanding blockchain. So that's why we are first going to understand, let's say, for example, if this was an internet lecture, first we would be understanding what Facebook is, how it works and what it does. And then later moving on to what internet actually does. Because taking a specific use case in detail can help us to ascertain the fundamental principles underlying that use case. Just a second. Okay. Yeah. So now first we will get some formalities out of the way. And by formalities, we mean, of course, the definitions which come up first. Of ideas, and we'll have to separate them first. To understand the power of blockchain systems, it is important to distinguish between three things. And we have to completely make a distinction between what is the Bitcoin currency, how Bitcoin is used as the currency. The second is the specific type of blockchain which is powering this currency. So the currency is different, and the technology, the specific type of blockchain that powers is different. Tomorrow, I can call Bitcoin as Bitcash or Bitgold or anything. And instead of using it as currency, I can use it to keep a record of let's say trades and securities. But the underlying technology, if it is not changed, it means that I'm only changing the use case. So the use case is different from the underlying technology. So again, first there is a Bitcoin currency, which is a specific type of use case. The second is the specific type of blockchain, which is powering this Bitcoin currency. And the third is the idea of blockchain in general. Now, to give you a comparative example, imagine that imagine your phone network, your mobile network, and let us try to take this analogy a bit further. Let's say there is an idea of a phone network, not the idea of phone network cellular, but just the concept of a phone network, that we all know that phone network exists. Similarly, there is an idea, a concept that something like blockchain exists. Now imagine that there is a specific phone network. Now we are getting more specific. For example, Jio, Vodafone, BSNL, Idea, and so on. Similarly, on the other end, there is a specific type of blockchain that underlies Bitcoin or any other similar coin. So again, first there is an idea, then there is a specific type of that idea. And drilling down further, there is a specific use of the phone network. For example, calling someone. I can use the same network, the same mobile device, the same card for different purposes. I can use it to call or WhatsApp or SMS and so on. Similarly, that there's the Bitcoin or any other currency. So I can use the same type of the same specific type of blockchain for multiple other use cases. And now, taking that analogy forward, the blockchain world is divided into two parts today: cryptocurrencies and tokenization for private sector and individual use. And the second is blockchain for public services, for replacing traditional ways of running anything. So today, when you hear the word blockchain, you have to understand that there are two completely different and independent worlds. Around 2013 or 2014, there was a single river, which was Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Then that river had a tributary and it diverged into two parts. The other was people started thinking, can we use this code for something else? Can we use this code for, let's say, storing health records data or land records data? And hence, two completely independent rivers, or you could say streams, have emerged today, which do not have any kind of correlation with each other. So for example, in the second part, when we say, let us use blockchain for storing health records, that has hardly anything to do with how cryptocurrencies are working and so on. Yet the common point is everything began back in 2008. 2008 is a landmark year for Bitcoin or blockchain or everything. Not just because of what happened then, but also because many people have guessed that something else happened in 2008, which was the economic depression. And without it, maybe blockchain would not have had the kickstart. And we'll get into that. So first, to just go deeper into Bitcoin, let us see that in how many countries first Bitcoin is actually legal today. So, and it's very opposite. And countries like India are very ambivalent. They still do not have any clear stance. So in 2017, April, Japan passed a bill in parliament accepting Bitcoin as legal tender. So you can literally buy groceries or ice cream in Japan using Bitcoin. However, countries like Bolivia and Ecuador have completely banned it. And the reason for banning is that they fear the implications of this technology, which does not need any bank or any government to function. And majority countries of the world have an ambivalent stance. Let's say India. So the Supreme Court just last month gave a news that, okay, Bitcoin trading is now legal, but slowly they are trying to understand what are the implications of it. Whether, so for example, I was invited to conduct a blockchain training session for the IS officers of the NCR government. And I realized that the primary task in front of the government is basically how do you deal with the income that is generated from, let's say, Bitcoin, whether you treat it as an asset or whether you treat it as cash, for example, whether you treat it as money like rupees in your pocket or whether you treat it as gold, and so many other questions, as well as because it's very easy to hide your identity over Bitcoin and blockchain. that time bypassing tax and all becomes very easy. For example, the very founder of Bitcoin, who must right now he must be valued at around $44 billion, and people are guessing that given the current trajectory in the rise of prices in Bitcoin, that unknown person, or it could even be a group of persons, Satoshi Nakamoto, that account could become worth $1 trillion. And we still don't know the identity. And it's not as if people have not tried. People have been trying. So the power to hide your identity also obfuscates the method to tax it or how to deal with it. So just what I just said, an illustration. So the green countries that you see are perfectly okay. They love Bitcoin and you can't do anything over there. And the red ones is where it is completely banned. And the purple ones are where the whole claims of Bitcoin are a bit contentious. The red ones are completely hostile. And as you can see, India comes in the contentious part in the sense that we have some legal restrictions on the use of Bitcoin. Now let's begin at the very beginning, and it has to begin with the origin of accounting first. Then we will see what it has to do with trade, the rise of central institutions, and the failure of this central institution. So basically, this story begins in the 14th century, and it will end in 2008. So, although accounting is considered a very dull subject, and being an engineer myself, I had very little to do with accounting until I understood that quite a lot of our life, the prosperity that we have, or the institutions that we have, the central ones especially, they owe a lot of their existence to accounting. So for example, we will begin with the simplest form of accounting, which is single entry accounting. So single entry accounting is the most easiest. So for example, जब आप अभी किराना दुकान में जाते हो और एक लिस्ट लेके जाते हो कि इतना धनिया लाना है, इतनी चाय पत्ती लानी है, and so on, that list is a single entry accounting. It is an example of a single entry accounting क्योंकि उसकी एक ही बार एंट्री की गई है, एक ही जगह पे की गई है और अब बस आप ही के पास है. So that type of accounting, that is the very origin. And the earliest example of single entry accounting go back to the Sumerians, the earliest known examples, not the earliest examples. And you can just put a note in one ledger saying that so and so one person owes me 100 rupees or they owe a certain thing. And although it might sound very simple, this very method of single entry accounting, of just making a note of things, of the work that people have done and so on, this has allowed kings and queens to form larger economies, castles, trades, and everything, trades with other kingdoms. Everything was built upon the concept of single entry accounting. Something very simple, but again, very powerful. And of course, single entry has its own limitations. Example, so for example, let's say a pyramid is being built and you are bringing in stones right from the Nile River up to the region of pyramid of the Giza, and you're working every day. And there is one person, single accountant, who is making a note of how many boulders and how many stones you have brought throughout the day. Suppose that person makes a mistake, or suppose you have a fight with the other person, the accountant especially, and the accountant simply decides to wipe your record. What can you do? Of course, if there comes any kind of customer care, probably you can do that. But if the accountant, the person who is keeping an account, decides to erase your record, there is nothing that you can do. As well as that single person is also needed to be perfect. So that person cannot make any even human mistakes or manual mistakes. Otherwise, everyone else will suffer. So those are the limitations. And this single entry accounting was also used for simple trade and all right until the 14th century. So now the image in front of you, I'll just ask whether you know this guy. The thing is, even I did not know this guy until a few years ago, until I actually started reading him. But he is the reason why you have banks today, why you have prosperity, why you have any kind of possibility of exchange of goods across borders. So his name is Father Luca Pacioli, and he belonged to the Renaissance period. In fact, many people have claimed that it is because of his existence that Renaissance period could exist. One particular thing about the Renaissance period, we tend to, praise the intellectual achievements as well as the artistic achievements brought forth in that period. But those things were also made possible because there was a kind of certain economic prosperity. Economic prosperity in turn gives you the possibility of having a certain kind of luxury. And that's how you come up with your intellectual and artistic achievements. But where did the economic prosperity come from? It came because of course, increase in trade. Now, why was there an increasing trade in 14th century and not until before then? The reason is this guy, because he's also called the father of modern accounting, and he introduced the concept called double entry bookkeeping. So double entry bookkeeping is, let's say if you get an SMS on the first day of a month saying that your account has been debited or your bank account has been credited. So what is this debiting and crediting? So the system where we keep a book, and that book is kept by two parties who are doing any kind of financial transaction, which includes debits, credits, accounts receivable, expendables, and so on. So this kind of simple bookkeeping, that if I am debiting my records, you have to credit your records. And similarly, if I am crediting, you have to debit. How account receivables will work, and simple. This is what empowered the whole growth of the trading sector. That is why trade could happen so fast and so much. So double entry bookkeeping in accounting is a system of bookkeeping that is named because every entry that we make to an account requires a corresponding and opposite entry to a different account. Simple. That if I'm debiting my account and giving something to you, then you have to credit it and so on. And the left hand side is debit and right hand side is credit. And many of us would be aware of this. But again, this has its own limitations. What are the limitations of double entry bookkeeping? So the limitations of double entry bookkeeping is that because there were always instances regarding what version of truth is right. If I have debited my account, but you have not credited your account, then who is speaking the truth? Whether I am speaking the truth or you are speaking the truth. In order to solve this matter, there were the rise of central institutions, including banks and courts. In fact, the very word bank originates from 14th century itself, from Italy. Bank literally means just a desk on which you sit, and that desk is where most of these financial transactions and trades used to happen. And slowly banks took up the responsibility of keeping a record of all the double entries. And whenever banks themselves started failing or there was a dispute between two banks, then the courts were given additional powers. So that is how it happened. The courts and the banks both started gaining their power. And there was a dependency on these authorities. Similarly, now the central banks, they have a bad track record of wasting people's money, leading to depression, global unemployment, as we'll see in the next slide in 2008. And sometimes the transaction fees can be really huge, which is called remittances. In fact, there are some certain kinds of transactions where between two countries, the commission can be up to 30%. And the last is I can track my own money. I don't control what happens with it. So for example, all those bad loans that are being given away and they will be written off. How is the bank going to, maintain their books? How it is going to happen when the taxpayer money is going to get pumped in sooner or later. So that is what happened when it was the banks who did the mischief in 2008, but the bailout was given by the honest taxpayers of the US. So now there was an idea that can we go one step ahead to double entry bookkeeping? And this idea came back in 1989 by a scientist named Yuri Igiri. Yuri Igiri, in fact, he was probably the youngest CA, the registered CA in Japan. Then he moved to US, where he just proposed a system that if we could combine the concepts of cryptography, we'll get to there, along with accounting, then what we might have is a triple entry bookkeeping. What is triple entry? Double entry is easy to understand, right? I am with, you are making a credit. There are only two entries. So what is the third entry proposed by Yuri Igiri? He said that what if all of these transactions happen on a certain kind of platform, which is unerasable and uneditable once the entry has been made. So what does triple entry accounting give? It provides between two parties over a transaction and the transaction could be anything, any type of asset. It could be money or a commodity. You could be selling spices. You could be dealing in commodities itself. But whatever you decide to make that entry on a certain special kind of platform. Now, of course, there was no blockchain in 1989. In fact, it came to 20 years later. But the idea that we could have a platform which will ensure that once something goes into that, it cannot be erased and it cannot be edited by anyone. So that is the whole power, that today I need a bank, because if the next person makes a mistake or anything, the banks are supposed to correct the mistake. But blockchain was supposed to be a kind of platform where mistakes will simply not be allowed, thereby bypassing the very need of this central institutions. And just look at the last point, the power to declare an objective reality. What does this simply mean? It's a very simple meaning, that I am saying I made a credit, you are saying that you did not make a debit. So both of us have different versions of reality. So these are subjective realities. An objective reality is something which is the truth, which exists independent of your and my opinion. So that is something that blockchain was supposed to be. And again, now we come to the 2008 depression, where bankers lost billions of dollars because they maybe purposefully, or after a certain point, it was definitely purposeful, where they made some fraudulent investments. And the recession that we saw have been one of the greatest ones, which of course led to unemployment and so many other things. So what happened was that there was a movement which was called the cypherpunk movement. There is a word already which exists, which is called cyberpunk with a B. So cypherpunk is a play on those words, where cypher talks about cryptography. And the cypherpunk movement is all against all of this fraudulent transactions, as well as these big institutions wasting the money and so on. And that started gaining momentum. And attempts to have a currency which is independent of banks and governments were already being made before 2008. Example are DigiCash, Hashcash, BitGold, and so on. But 2008 really saw the release of a white paper. So yes, so what you see in front of you is what came out in 2008. This is the first time when the word Bitcoin or blockchain is going to be used. These two words did not exist before 2008. And a person or a group of persons, or a woman or a group of people, we have nothing. So, but the entity is named Satoshi Nakamoto. And it's a very small paper. You can still go and see the original paper that was uploaded in 2008. And they said that a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Peer-to-peer means I'm a peer, you are peer, and I'm going to transfer directly cash to you. Which cash? The cash itself is going to get generated. And there are no banks, there is no central bank, there is no customer care, there is no government. Yet it was supposed to function without any errors. And it's all laid out in 8 or 10 pages. So that 2008, now we will just have a small fast forward history of what actually happened after 2008. So 2009, which is in January, we saw the emergence of the first block. First block is just the record of the first transactions. And that first block is known as the Genesis block. And it was mined. Why it is called mining and all, we'll get to that. So the Bitcoins came into existence in 2009. The first transaction was that the account called Satoshi Nakamoto paid itself some Bitcoins. That was the first transaction. Then the second transaction was to a person who everyone knows called Hal Finney. So Satoshi Nakamoto sent some Bitcoins to Hal Finney. And so there was a group of people working on the Bitcoin code. And the person who came up with the idea, that person did not disclose his or her identity at all. But there are other people like Hal Finney, for example. Hal Finney is the second person to have a Bitcoin transaction. Just like we have Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. Then Neil Armstrong in this case is Satoshi Nakamoto. And the second and slowly this group of this community grew. And toward the end of year, in October, $1 was worth 1,300 Bitcoins. So, of course, all these rates are just like stocks. They depend more on perception rather than anything else. Even the money in your pocket, it has value because you believe it has value. There is no gold to back it up like there was during the gold standard. everything regarding money. In fact, there is a nice quote. Someone has said that money is nothing but a global collective hallucination, where we believe it has value and then it has value. So similarly, just keep this in mind. $1 was worth 1,300 Bitcoins in October 2009. In 2010, so this computer scientist named Laszlo Hannes, he also made some important contributions to the code, but he also is famous for one thing. So he was the first person who convinced a pizza company that you need to really get into the Bitcoins and we are doing something great. So he sent 10,000 Bitcoins to a London man in exchange for 2 pizzas valued for $25. This was the first time when Bitcoins were used in real life. And the person who gave $25 believed that 10,000 Bitcoins are worth $25. So again, May 2010, $25 are worth 10,000 Bitcoins. Going ahead. In 2011, steadily it started gaining value when people realized that yes, it is really working on its own. The possibility of a hack is very less and the fraud is very low. And steadily making gains in value after finally passing 1 cent threshold. In February 2011, a major milestone occurred. 1 Bitcoin was worth $1. So February 2011, $1 was equal to 1 Bitcoin. And in 2017, December, it really peaked. So that was the peak that we've ever seen, where 1 Bitcoin was worth $20,000, which is like to buy 1 Bitcoin, you needed at least around 14.2 lakh rupees. So imagine just within a span of 7 years, the value where I needed to give 10,000 Bitcoins to buy a pizza. But in 2017, it really peaked to something like 14 lakh rupees. And right now it's around $8,000. I haven't updated this figure, so these are not today's numbers. And that is why this also an emergence of a curious case of breed of people called Bitcoin millionaires. And the person that you see in front of you, I just met him, Amar Bhandari. So at the age of 13 or 14, he did not know what he was doing. He just took all of his money from his father's bank account and bought all the Bitcoins when Bitcoin had no value. Then by the age when he was 20, when he was 18, in fact, he realized that the Bitcoins that he has bought from his father's money now have tremendous value. So he became a millionaire. And before he was even 20 years old. So when I met him, he must have been hardly 21, 22. So he spent all of that money again. And there are many like him. In fact, there is a book out there called Bitcoin Millionaires, which will give you the story of you must have seen the movie Social Network. In the movie Social Network, there are 2 twins who invested in Facebook. They had a legal fight with Mark Zuckerberg and they exited with a certain amount of settlement. Now, what did they do after the settlement is what is documented in the book. So these twins, they ended up buying huge amount of Bitcoin back when it had no value. And then again, they became Bitcoin billionaires, actually, not millionaires. That's the title of the book. Yes. So again, now getting back to the basics, that what is who or she is Satoshi Nakamoto, who founded Bitcoin. We don't know who he is. And they introduced a new type of ledger. Ledger is just a way to record things. And Bitcoin is just that. So Bitcoin is nothing but just a ledger. The money in your pocket is also nothing but a record of an account. That's it. There's nothing more to it. But there is a difference, that the money in your pocket has something very special written on it. It says that मैं धारक को 100 रुपए देने का वादा करता हूँ, or anything like that. So the trust is imparted externally from a central authority, which is the RBI or the government. In terms of Bitcoin, there is no one who is doing the wada. The trust is internal. So that's why we called Bitcoin a trustless system. Does not need trust from outside. Hence, you will hear the word trustless a lot. Now let us see, how does Bitcoin work? Yes. So before we go there, just try to understand there are 3 types of systems. In fact, 4 types of systems: centralized, decentralized, distributed, and non-distributed is not shown. But just imagine a single dot. Centralized and decentralized are all about control. So If there is only one single point of control, then it is centralized. If multiple people are controlling it, it is decentralized. Distributed and non-distributed does not speak about control. It speaks actually about the physical location of the data. If the same data is being held in multiple places, it's called distributed system, like your Facebook, Google, and everything. They have distributed systems across servers all over the world. Non-distributed is basically something like my laptop. The data on my laptop exists only on my laptop and nowhere. Now, what is blockchain? Blockchain is a decentralized and distributed system. So there is not a single person who controls anything. At the same time, everything is not placed in a single record as well. And to give you a quick summary of what actually happens is, a blockchain is a distributed database without any central authority. It is just a database of who has paid what to anyone. Bitcoin just happens to be a token of that transaction. Instead of saying that I have done, let's say, 5 days worth of labor for someone, I am just using Bitcoin as a replacement for that amount of labor, so that there could be standardization in terms of basically money. And this database looks exactly the same to all participants. So what I see in front of me is a whole record of all the transactions that has ever happened. And blockchain is the technology which is used to ensure that everything is recorded and maintained. It is not possible to change the contents of the database. So for example, today, if I send 10 Bitcoins to Priyadarshi sir, that record will be made public and globally available to each and every person in the world. At the same time, a hacker cannot come and change the record. Once it goes there permanently. And this database enables moving of value from one node to another. As we saw, moving of value means nothing but recording the balances. So imagine that if I am giving 10 Bitcoins to Priyadarshi sir, and Priyadarshi is using those 10 Bitcoins for 5 other purposes, if everyone starts keeping a record in a virtual system where there is just a standardized node, then we would never need to print money at all. Because just imagine if everyone is only keeping a record of whatever services they are owed or whatever services they owe to someone else. If that record can include everyone, if that record can include each and every person, then why would we ever need to print any money in the first place? Because that is all that money is, right? It is just a record of how much is owed to the next person who is carrying that money and nothing more. And of course, there are some misconceptions and criticism against Bitcoin that it does not have any intrinsic value. The answer to that is even the money in your pocket does not have any intrinsic value, because now it is not backed by any gold. The second is it's a Ponzi scheme allegation, but the difference between a Ponzi scheme is that in a Ponzi scheme, there is nothing to sell, but a Bitcoin actually sells trust. It gives you a complete guarantee that once you use this for a certain kind of transaction, it will never be erased, and that has value. Bubble allegation could be true, that people might be thinking that it is more valuable than it actually is. Fourth is again also true. It is used for bad purposes, because if you can hide your identity over transactions, then it can be used for all the black market, and it is being used. The last allegation is also true for Bitcoin, not for blockchain, because Bitcoin was the first type of blockchain, and that is why there are many inefficiencies. But we realize it's an inefficiency because the technology has progressed a lot today. But back then we did not know that it was inefficient, right? So for example, today, Bitcoin network uses more electricity than the country of Switzerland. So that is the energy output needed to keep this system running. But that's true for Bitcoin. Modern blockchains, for example, the one that we are working on as a team for the farmers in Nashik, they hardly use any energy at all, more than the other systems. And now to give you an idea of what the Indian government and officers think about blockchain is that, so this is a quote by Dr. Harmeet Singh from Commissioner of Income Tax, who believes that officers of the Income Tax Department are not equipped to monitor or implement taxation of cryptocurrencies, and that training of officers in the basics of blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies is the need of the hour. And yeah, we'll stick to blockchain now again. So what are the properties of blockchain? Now that we saw what is Bitcoin, but what is blockchain? So blockchain is nothing but a database which keeps a record of anything that you want it to be. We are right now keeping a record of how much tomatoes are being processed, how much grapes are being sold by which person to any other person, what is the post-harvest losses, how much onions are getting lost. So we are not keeping a record of any transaction. We are just recording all the agricultural values and how the ownership changes. So the farmer is a owner, then the farmer collective is a owner, wholesaler, distributor, and what is the value addition when the ownership changes, how much losses are there, or what was the basically rise in prices owing to the value addition, and so on. Everything that is actually happening in the real world, we are just keeping a record of it. So that is all that blockchain is. It is just a new type of database in which you cannot delete or edit any entry. Entries can only be added to blockchain. The second is it is distributed. Distributed because this record is kept with everyone, so that everyone becomes responsible and everyone becomes basically a party to the entire system. Immutability means, as I said, it can be changed. Provenance is just a fancy word for having an audit trail or finding the history of something. So provenance is basically when I can ensure you that what is the history of these grapes, for example. So if I can say that these grapes that I hold in my hand in the Mumbai supermarket, the seeds were sown back in October and it was harvested in February and processed in another new location. If I can give you the entire story of how the grapes are in your hand, that is provenance. Then the part is that it is trustless. Trustless means that trust is inbuilt. I do not need any external authority to give a stamp over the data, because the very type of database that we are using, which is blockchain, ensures that the trust is inbuilt. And that is why it is also secure and real time, because if there is one authorized change in one instance of a node. So for example, if a farmer is registering that there is a harvest loss of 10%, which is occurring during transport, though that similar entry will be reflected in everyone else's accounts, from the transporter till the processor and everyone. So that's why it is real time. And because it is real time, so it is also used, just to give an example, if you remember, I gave an example of how money is being sent from one country to another. So what happens in those cases is the money is changing accounts from at least 10 to 20 banks sometimes. And every bank takes a certain cut for processing the transaction. And then finally, a person working in America can send their money to someone in, let's say, Middle East. But this happens because there is no common database. That is why all the banks have to make an entry and then change it and so on. And sometimes it takes 4 to 5 days before money is properly sent in some cases. What if all of those banks were just based upon a blockchain kind of system? In that case, the moment the money is sent, the money will be shown as received from the intended beneficiary, because it will be happen in real time, and there will be no fees for this as well. So earlier, when there was a 30% fees and out of 100 rupees, 30 rupees were given to the banks as commission, here there is absolutely no fees. And again, to revise some of the main properties of blockchain, the first is trust, transparency, and accountability. Trust because all the parties involved in the transaction know that the data that they see in front of them was not edited or deleted. Transparency because the ledger is distributed. All peers involved in the transaction network can view it as a subject. And accountability because since all parties in the transaction can view the ledger, everyone can agree on how the transaction is progressing while it is ongoing and how it went once it is complete. So blockchain is just another fancy way, or you could say a real way, of implementing the value of transparency. And again, so this is a use case especially that I will invite you to explore on your own. So right now, I was invited to the BBC London headquarters back in 2018. Over there in BBC London headquarters, I was introduced to a team where they were exploring how can we stop fake news and trolling. And it was proposed that if instead of having a simple internet, if we have a blockchain-based internet where everyone can be tracked and everyone can be made accountable for whatever data they are posting upon, then maybe we can have certain kind of control over what happens, right? So now the next part is can we have an internet based on blockchain? So that is going to be called Web 3.0. What was Web 1.0? Web 1.0 is when there are static pages in front of you and you read them. So read only. Currently, we have Web 2.0 where it is interactive. When you're using Facebook, you are interacting with the data, you are posting some of the data and so on. And internet is very good for sharing information, but it is absolutely not at all reliable when it comes to sharing value. What is the difference between sharing information and transferring value? The difference is that if I am, let's say, posting a meme, that meme is also with me and it is also with you. That is why it is just information which is shared. But the very definition of value is that if I am sending it to you, it should be deleted from my records. It should completely change ownership. Otherwise, it will be like I am spending the same 10 rupees to give to Priyadarshi sir, other 50 rupees to give to Mangesh sir, and so on. Because if I am not keeping a track record of the ownership of the assets, then it simply won't work. And that is why internet is very good for sharing information. It is very bad for keeping track of value. And if you just Google after this talk, social media blockchain, you will see that there are 6 social media websites which are already being built on blockchain. And I'm going to just talk on this example a bit more before we open ourselves to question, because imagine on Facebook, you are making the content, you are consuming the content, and the person who is becoming rich is Mark Zuckerberg, right? So you create the content, you consume the content. So you are the product as well as the, and who becomes rich? Mark Zuckerberg. A slightly better model exists with Facebook, YouTube, where after a certain number of views, YouTube starts giving you a certain amount of money. But what if there was a blockchain platform which was tracking, a social media platform which tracked, let's say you are making a good post, which is getting a good reach and people are appreciating it. So similarly, the ads, the marketing ads, which basically they are the ones who pay Zuckerberg. Instead of paying Zuckerberg, if the reach of a network is getting its credit from you, then the marketing ads will simply pay you. So in the case of Facebook, the revenue model is completely upside down, because all that Mark Zuckerberg does is provide a platform, but that platform has meaning only because people like you and me are posting over there and he's becoming rich. So that is why there is a big threat to Facebook as well. Another example is, of course, Ola, Uber, Airbnb. So we must have all had the WhatsApp message, right? That Airbnb has no real estate of its own, but it is the largest real estate company in the world. Uber and Ola they don't own any vehicles, but they are the largest cab company in the world, and so on. And even the Supreme Court in its judgment of 2017 made a passing remark that aggregator economies are really brilliant and all. But the aggregator economies, all that they do is collect information at one place and charge a huge commission. Why is that even needed? If there is an open source platform which can ensure that the money is transferred directly to the person who is providing the value from the person who is consuming the value, then why do we even need this? So the entire revenue model of this much appreciated aggregator economies, these are called aggregator economies, the aggregators like Ola, Uber, Oyo, and so on, they just aggregate data, connect the consumer with the seller, and take a huge fees, which could be even 60% in some cases. That can be removed. In fact, Airbnb is being replaced in countries like Ukraine, where people have built an open source platform. So let's say instead of in a ride in Ola, which takes you around 200 rupees, the driver gets 90 rupees or 100 rupees, 50 and 100 rupees goes back to Oyo or to Ola. What if you are charged only 105 rupees, 100 rupees goes to the driver directly and 5 rupees goes to the community of open source developers, and so on. So that is where blockchain is slowly leading things. That is the kind of revolution that we expect. Something which began with Bitcoin back then is now getting slowly transferred over here. Yes. And so with that, I'm also trying my best to come up with the detailed videos of use cases, and I'll do that later. For now, I think I'll open myself to questions if there are any. Priyadarshi sir.
Yeah, thank you, Gaurav. thanks a lot for those opening session, and it's wonderful. You have concluded that Bombay Stock Exchange and Dalal Street can be free of dalals. The market can be open, right? So there are a lot of questions with respect to what you have presented, but shall we go with Gunman first?
Yes,
and then have questions? Or
Gunman is actually in a call with Amazon right now.
Okay. Thank you. So, so you close with an example of Facebook, where Facebook user are the producer and consumer, but the returns goes to Mark Zuckerberg and not the producer and the consumer. So in that, in this, if this blockchain technology is being extended and adopted by various industries, what are the industries you see that there will be a disruption?
Okay, so the biggest disruption will be in the finance world. So, for example, you must have heard about the SWIFT system. The SWIFT is how all the international banks do their reconciliations and so on. And every time there is a reconciliation, there will be a charging of fees and everything, as well as it takes a lot of time. So finance will see a lot of jobs being replaced, because wherever there was a need to do reconciliation, to charge fees for that and so on, it can just be automated. So finance is one sector. The other is, so there was something interesting. The Department of Homeland Security in USA, they released a document of who are the essential workers during the corona pandemic. And one of the jobs that they enlisted was blockchain for food supply chain. So that is officially documented. So the blockchain developers who work in food supply chains come under essential securities in the case of US, because wherever you need a complete transparency over the supply chain, which is most needed in case of food, there we can see a huge disruption. So for example, if you are buying 100 rupees of grapes, if there is a QR code on that, then you can scan the QR code simply, and it can show you that out of 100 rupees, 40 rupees are going to so and so farmer, 10 rupees to a certain transporter, 30 rupees to the packaging and processor, and 20 rupees to the final retailer. If we can have a complete breakdown of what happens with the money, whether or not the distribution is fair comes later. But the primary question is, can the distribution of money itself be made transparent first? So food supply chain is, of course, and that's where we are working. That is our project basically, is that we are going to provide QR codes over the produce of the farmers that you can scan. The other major disruption will be in the government sector, because the whole point of having a government is to, give a certain kind of legitimacy to records. So my own friend, Chris Bates, what he did was that he did a project in land records in Ghana, where the person who keeps the land records, in our case, it is Patwari, Tehsildar, Talathi, and so on. So in case of Africa, it was kept by certain local authorities who had a bad habit of changing the data, which also happens in our country, of course. But what he did was that in the pilot, he put everything on blockchain. So land records themselves are clean. So government as a whole entity can see a number of use cases. That is where I was primarily working for 4 years. And the World Health Organization has officially partnered with IBM to create a blockchain platform to keep a track record with all the medical health facilities and the test centers who are conducting the corona pandemic changes, the corona pandemic results basically, so that we can have a complete distributed as well as wide reaching and trustworthy record of what is the actual number of corona cases. China in the month of February released 20 different blockchain based platforms. So for example, the Red Cross in China, it had a very bad, it's a charity based organization. It had a very bad reputation for wasting people's money and doing corruption and fraud and everything. But in February, they released a blockchain based charity focused platform, where people were given complete assurance that the money that you send us will have complete track record maintained on a blockchain ledger. Said that around $20 million worth of money was poured in because people knew that if something is happening on blockchain, then we can probably trust it. So NGOs, funds, wherever we need transparency, that's another huge sector. And yeah, so in the month of February, I was commissioned by the Swiss Arts Council to submit a research report on what blockchain can do for the artists in Switzerland. So I was sponsored to conduct a research trip, and I met various digital artists as well as blockchain experts back in Switzerland. So today, for example, there's a certain artist who makes a good song. That song goes on iTunes or Spotify or Ghana.com, Savan.com, YouTube, and you end up paying money indirectly to these platforms, or the marketing companies pay money to these platforms, and the artist basically gets hardly 1 or 2% out of everything. What if again there is an open source platform where the artists are consuming their content and so on? So art itself is going to get a huge complete renovation, and people have already implemented some use cases. So, and the biggest use cases, of course, many people say is yet to come, because the biggest change will not come from people. Change comes from people who are experts in their own field. What blockchain can end up implementing it. For example, the work that I am doing, I had zero idea about how agriculture works 2 years ago. Zero idea. All I did was conduct workshops of blockchain, primarily in Marathi. And the one workshop that I conducted in Nashik, the leader of the farmers, he basically came and told me that can we use your technology to solve so and so problem. And that is how this entire idea was born. So the biggest disruption comes from people who are experts in their own field, and they just need to know a few basics about blockchain, nothing in detail. And then they can come up with an idea that, okay, a lack of trust was here in so and so place. Blockchain is providing trust. Now the industry is getting changed and so on. So yes. And of course, there are many other fields that I have not mentioned.
Yeah. So there's a ample amount of opportunity for various individuals, various groups who are into field of literature, arts, and so on. Yeah. Gaurav, you from the very beginning, it's engaging on this subject, and recently you have also started contributing to Lok Satta in Marathi. You are editor at the Frontiers of Blockchain in Switzerland. So how you received from the readers back in Switzerland and here in India, where you are trying to communicate this technology in local language, in Marathi and so
on? Yes. So the response over the Lok Satta Marathi articles has been really great. And I think it's primarily because it's very important. Blockchain is not a, let's say, a new tool. Like, for example, there is a summit which is going to happen after 2 days, which is on a technology called Node.js. If that was the case, Node.js is just a very advanced and fancy tool to do the same work that was already happening earlier. Blockchain does not fall into that category. Blockchain is a new way of doing things. Its history is way older than computer science. It has less to do with computer science and more to do with how societies are structured, how economies are structured, how incentive models are structured. So there exists a possibility that you can communicate what blockchain is to anyone in the world. And that possibility that's what I'm trying to leverage, because I can see that we are doing a disservice to ourselves by calling this as a very advanced computing technology. In a way, it is true, but only in a way. In a larger, truer context, for example, the example that I gave on Facebook and or Ola and Uber, these are not computing concepts, right? These are very human concepts that everyone can relate with. So if we can ensure that something can be communicated in a certain, in a larger comprehensive manner to anyone. So that is been the attempt, and I think it is showing some great results. In fact, tomorrow we will see around the 21st article. So 21 articles, all of them nearly 1200 to 1400 words. about Bitcoin. I've been speaking about the history of banking, of money, and what are the WikiLeaks movements and so on. So that is what my entire focus has been about. And everything is very relatable. So if you can ensure that you can take 10 steps back and look at the whole thing and not just see as very immediate, then the possibility to tell a good story exists. And then all that remains is whether you can tell the story or not. So that's what I'm trying. And the feedback has been really great for that.
Yeah. While making your presentation, you talk about the crisis, economic crisis back in 2008 and 2009. And we have seen the recession mainly due to the banks and their fraudulent loans and write-off. How do you think this technology will help to curb the things which we experienced in recent past in case of Yes Bank or in case of Nirav Modi or Malia and so on? Do you think this technology will be helpful? And if it is so, how many banks have adopted this and what's the status now?
So now something very curious is happening. Currently, there is a trend which is going on that let us associate ourselves with the word blockchain and it will be really great. So what is happening is that banks have started openly adhering and openly supporting blockchain, but they are not using it to its whole potential. So there is a consortium which is formed called BankChain. All you just Google, and it is led by a person called Mr. Rohas Nagpal, who is the CEO of PrimeChain Technologies. So what they are doing in over there is that they're ensuring that the KYC process is built completely on blockchain. So for example, if today I am submitting my documents to SBI, 15 years later, I want to open a new bank account in HDFC. I should not be asked to submit my documents again. So one time KYC and the sharing of KYC details across all the banks, that is something which is already happening. Around 20 national banks have participated into this, national and some private banks as well. And it is led by SBI, but it is not the complete power of blockchain. I think that's why it is very important for the common person or anyone who feels that their field could be impacted due to this to take a charge of the situation, because we are where internet was back in 1996. If we could have taken a control of the whole situation, that what should be digitized, what should not be digitized, and in what manner it should be digitized, probably a faulty revenue model like Facebook would not be existing today. But these faulty revenue models exist because many of us do not pay attention, and that's why things go on happening. So yes, banks today claim to use blockchain, but they are using it for very simple purpose. The whole potential of blockchain when it comes to trust, to avoid or at least to mitigate the cases like Nirav Modi, Malia and all those. There could be many. What about the names which are not come forth? Yeah. All of that could be, strangled to a good extent if blockchain was used fully. But of course, it is against the interest of a certain powerful people. And that is why, as one quote in my slide said, where Mr. Rachna Singh said that the future of Bitcoin or blockchain will be determined by politics and not by technology.
Is it similar experience of international banks like Barclays and so on? Or
yes, so everywhere is the same story. Mm-hmm. Right now, they are replacing the SWIFT system with a blockchain-based system. So they are using blockchain to ensure that their internal processes can be made more efficient. So let's say if blockchain can change 100 things in finance, they are using it for 10 things, which are good for them and them themselves. So yes, all those big banks are using blockchain, but in a very limited capacity and only to the extent where it benefits them and not to everyone.
Hope so that improving their own technology or improving their own system will help the consumers. Yeah, yes. There are more questions coming in, but before going to the questions from you said in your presentation that you closely work on e-governance with the state of Chhattisgarh.
Yeah.
What's your experience, and does it has improved considering the indicators of governance as such, particularly when we talk about accountability, transparency, and so on?
Yes, in fact, in the state of Chhattisgarh, the story is really nice, because what began with blockchain POCs and pilots, which was just done by friends, which I made on LinkedIn and so on. I intend to document that as well sometime. So that what began as pilots and on, we showed it to, let's say, we went to World Bank and we said that if we can implement a blockchain system for e-governance, then it can help the consumers in so and so manner. The pilots already show the results. The World Bank approved the project. The World Bank approved the funding for it. I was leading the World Bank funded blockchain project, the first of its kind, probably in the world, before I left it and started in my own startup. Now that same project is being replicated in the state of Orissa as well. So what the whole idea is, so for example, there is a birth in a scheduled caste family, and what happens is then the child, after, let's say, when he's 16 or 17, he has to go and fight for income certificate and scheduled caste certificate and validities and so on. So currently the model of governance in India is where you go to different government offices, ask for services, and then you get services. So what we did was that we inverted the model. We said that what if we combine all of these databases, not into a single database, because that will be against privacy, but we just create relevant triggers across all databases. So for example, the moment there is a birth and we register the birth in a hospital, so the moment a birth certificate is generated, the attributes of my parents, their income, their caste, their religion, whether they are in the BPL category, whether they have ration cards and so on, these attributes must be shifted directly upon me. And let's say there is another scheme with the WCD, with the Women and Child Department, where I am supposed to, or my mother is supposed to receive, the mother is supposed to receive, let's say, 600 rupees per month. Then that mother should not be asked to fill a form. Instead, what will happen is that this system, which exists based on triggers, after 6 months, it will automatically send a trigger that you need to check up on whether that the certain person is receiving the benefits or not. And similarly, let's say the scheduled caste child is now eligible to have scholarship at the age of 6. A trigger will be sent to the tribal education department or the higher education department, whichever is controlling the scholarships, to check up on whether something is happening or not. So a completely a system where you have to go to the government again and again, we try to invert it, because this is something which is already happening in Estonia. In fact, each and every country in the world is studying what is happening back in Estonia. It's a small country, earlier part of the Soviet USSR, and like it was born, it came into existence. It's as old as me. I mean, in 1990s, that's when the country was basically born in one way. But it made such tremendous progress with the adoption of blockchain. They connected different departments together, which is the current project that I did with Chhattisgarh. Then they connected the public sector and private sector on a common blockchain platform. And today, Estonia has built a blockchain platform to connect all the trade between two countries, Finland and Estonia. That project is called X Road. And in fact, I'll invite you to Google about it definitely. So not just Chhattisgarh, if you want to really understand the impact what blockchain has already brought since the past 6 or 7 years, we have to look at Estonia. In fact, you can become a citizen of Estonia sitting wherever you might be sitting. So I also applied for an e-citizenship to Estonia. We can open up a virtual office in Estonia and everything and so on. So yeah, so a success story of blockchain and governance exists in the form of Estonia that I would encourage the audience to look up.
Right. So you say the public delivery system, the public system which exists in terms of various schemes for marginalized sections, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and so on and so forth, can be improved by using the blockchain technology.
Yes, definitely, yes.
Right. So one needs not to be at the receiver end all the time or face the wrath of administrative officers. Rather than triggering system can be, but can this triggering system be made more accountable? I mean, yes, the system will generate the triggers, but what if the triggers are not being paid attention to? How that accountability will be increased, even though the triggers are being generated?
Yes. example of a cab service. So Ola and Uber, it's not as if they are not needed at all. They provide a very important service. They provide ratings, right? They give ratings of how the drivers are performing, their behavior, and so on and so forth. And if I am supposed to build a blockchain platform without Uber or without Ola, where will that trust come from? Well, that simply the trust will come over time when users will use the blockchain system more and more. And the drivers can also rate the customers can also rate the drivers, and this rating will also be based upon the performance. So an automated rating system, depending upon how many triggers were actually acted upon, whether or not the money was actually delivered or not, that can be built. So for example, today we are disbursing all our funds for public schemes from a system called PFMS. That is what all the governments use. It's built by NIC, Public Financial Management System. That is the system that they're using. So if we could combine these two, where we are not just generating triggers, but also saying that whether that trigger has also been fulfilled or not, or whether a complete backlog. So let's say there's an adhikari ke bagal mein we are creating an entire log that there were 50 triggers generated, and out of those 50, 40 are red, completely unfulfilled. Then that kind of public accountability system can be made. In fact, that is a very easy thing to do once you've implemented the blockchain system.
Yeah. From the very beginning of your presentation, you talk about the accounting system like single entry, double entry, and sort of ledger, and blockchain as a digital ledger. So one of the questions which is coming up is, what is the medium of blockchain and how is the ledger maintained on the blockchain?
Okay. So as I said, blockchain is nothing but a database which exists in the backend. So for example, if today I was supposed to build let's say Oyo, a cab service is being built on blockchain, only it's for a user who is using it, only the backend changes. So how you use the system, what as a user, what you are exposed to does not change at all. So let's say we call ourselves full stack developers, like how a computer, how any software is built. It's built by, let's say, a full stack developer. One person will do the backend, then there will be front ending, back ending, there will be UI, cyber security, 10 other modules in place. So all those modules exist just the way that they exist. Nothing changes. It's just that the heart of the system, which is the database, it is getting replaced by blockchain. It is just like, for example, your car, it looks the same, but instead of having an old engine, now it is running with a much powerful engine. So the driver experience would be slightly better, but nothing changes fundamentally, which is a good thing, where we are not asking users to go out of their way and do something very difficult in order to be a beneficiary of the blockchain system. That is not the case.
Gaurav, you work with many software industries as a consultant and so on. Now the question for you is like, your expertise with the blockchain lead you to left all those and start your entrepreneurship, or something else was there? And I would also like to know about your startup, which you are doing in Nasik.
Yes. In fact, Gunwant was supposed to talk but he's stuck in a Amazon. He's in a call with the Amazon.
That's why the question to you.
Yeah. So I'll take up that question. And so when I started working in blockchain, I was a part of a consulting company, one of the big 4 consulting companies, as they call it. And I realized that there could be a possibility that the freedom that you have to, basically experiment and evolve this technology on your own, to take control or to take charge, can exist. And the moment I came to know about blockchain and what it can do and pilots, I've been trying to, have my own startup. But having a startup in our case is not that easy. Because you need salaries, right? You cannot live without salaries. So it took me around close to 4 years to ensure that while I was working, I was also doing 100 other things and find something meaningful, which can also ensure that I am getting paid. At least not as much as I used to get paid earlier, but at least something that can keep on things going. So that is the dual challenge that I faced. That challenge was finally answered after 100 attempts, when I realized that if then based upon the additional value, I'm just getting a smaller portion of that increased value. And it can be enough to sustain a small group of, let's say, 6 or 7 people that now Gunwant is also a part of. So this kind of, let's say, a very really not, I wouldn't call it an ideal system, but yes, close to ideal system. It took a lot of time, but yes, for 4 years I've been trying to leave my job without but I did also everything, and the plan to have something of my own, because the technology was new and I wanted to see what we can do new with it. Probably if blockchain had not come in my life, I don't know if I would have been an entrepreneur as they call it or not. But yeah, but it's just the same thing for me. It's not as if you call yourself a CEO, but your salary is less than 1/4 of what it used to be. So these tax and all that don't really mean much. Yeah.
And how what's the Imatech Innovations Private Limited now engaged with while working on the issue of agriculture and farmers in Nashik?
Yes. So in more than a year ago, one of our activists, in fact, Mr. Sushant Pawar, he's an Ambedkarite activist who invited me over to an event in Santa Cruz, where I happily went from Chhattisgarh to Santa Cruz just to be present at his event, and I gave a small demo. Over there, a leader of the farmer collective, friends of the leader of the farmer collective were present, and they said that you really need to come to Nashik and see and explain whatever the work you've done to the farmers, and just at least have a discussion. We don't know what can happen. And I was also intrigued because I wanted to know more about the food supply chain and everything. And I took 2 more extra days of leave from my organization, from my company. I came to Nashik. I saw what the farmers are doing. I told them what blockchain can do. And within a couple of days, I just decided that now I'm leaving this job. And in fact, I had just begun my official designation as leading the World Bank project and all. But the moment I saw this, I saw an opportunity that I would be completely happy to work on this full time. I left my job. My friends left my job with them. And I've been conducting blockchain workshops for the past 3 years. And I had already identified some of the brightest students that I could in the workshops. I contacted them. I said that, would you be interested in working with me? Because you're in final year, initially you can begin as interns. Once you pass out, then we can possibly become full time. So everything grew organically. So the blockchain workshops, even our Ambedkarite activism and everything kind of fell in place. And that's why I felt that if I don't take up this chance right now, I might never get it again.
So the engagement with the farmers in agriculture will help to improve
Yes.
of their markets,
Yes.
their
Yeah,
products,
I explain about that.
their products and so on.
Yes. So the project that we are having is to provide a two-way transparency. We are telling the farmers what happens with their produce as it leaves their farm, as it travels along their value chain through the processors, distributors, wholesalers and retailers, at what price it is being sold. So the farmers have complete transparency of their whole produce. Similarly, the consumers can also see that who is getting paid in what. So customer is, let's say, is paying 100 rupees. We are trying to show each and every portion of who's taking what amount of money. At the same time, because we work in a farmer collective model. So farmer collective model is supposed to be, that's what I currently believe, is it's supposed to be the one model that each and every small land holding farmer needs to adopt, rather than working independently and in isolation. If farmer collectives can be formed, in fact, this was a vision proposed by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar back in the 1920s in a paper that I've shared on my Facebook wall as well, where he talks about the agrarian collectives and the importance of having a collective mode of farming. So the collective mode of farming is where we are trying to provide our value, which is supposed to minimize the post-harvest losses, which is supposed to increase the sales by direct connection with the market, and also possibly gain some premiums as well, which can be directly given to the farmers, because now we are providing them the values of trust and transparency.
Right. We are at the end of the show now, and rather I would like to have one more questions. Now in a democracy like India, you have seen it's very difficult now to go back to ballots, and we are using EVMs for voting. do you think blockchain technology can be used for EVMs and it can be more transparent and accountable?
Yes, because there is a lockdown current. I'll explain with the example of two cases. Right now, there is a lockdown in US, and the voting is about to begin for the presidential elections, and they are already considering blockchain as a means to do it, because having an app won't help you, because it can see, the thing is, if something is digital and if something is not on a open platform like blockchain, anything can be hacked. There is absolutely nothing in the world which can give you 100% security. So other than a paper-based ballot, or right now we have blockchain. So USA is already considering to conduct its elections in order to give trust to their voters. The other is a company called Horizon State, based in Australia. Around 4 years ago, around away, let us difference between blockchain mode. So the company called Horizon State, it basically gave out an idea, and it raised the largest crowdfunding for a startup in the history of Australia, because everyone wanted to migrate to blockchain when it comes to voting there as well. And possibly, if I can recall other examples, but the examples of voting in blockchain are numerous, and it is already being considered as a very natural and organic use case for blockchain.
Yeah, thank you, Gaurav. Thank you for joining. And I'm sure there will be a lot many opportunities to come back to you again with this technology and new initiatives which you are taking, not only in technology, but also on writing and communicating with the local people through various languages, regional languages. So thanks for being with us in Ambedkar Karwa. Viewers and audiences, keep watching. We'll be coming back again with new technology for you to share on. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.